Happy New Year, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome back. Hopefully you had a good holiday and a good break. If you got a break, you're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm your host, Jeremiah Fox. Before we kick it off this year, this decade, getting it fired up and ready, I'm going to read, we could call this the message of the week, the message of the year, the message of the decade. It's just a message. If my phone would unlock, I could read that for you. Give me just a second. Dun, dun, dun. This message is by a gentleman named Chris Winters. He's a serial nomad entrepreneur. This is a term I just became familiar with this week. Never heard that before. I just became familiar with Chris Winters this week. If you haven't, if you're not familiar with him, check him out. Very transformative person. Been quite successful recently, but he was a guy that got kind of started later in life. He's got a very interesting story. You can find him on a number of podcasts. So I was listening to a podcast this week, and he popped up, and he said a really great thing that I thought really had a lot to do with my guest today and the topic of discussion today. And his quote was, "Some people will gain a lot of success quickly, and they'll lose it. They will go back down. That's normally because they're so close to their old environment and their old selves. Completely immerse yourself in a brand new environment if you want to gain some kind of success, some kind of transformation." With that, I would like to introduce my guest today, a friend, a neighbor, an old buddy, Joanne Derwin. I'll read a little bit about Joanne and her past, and then we'll chew the fat and let her digress a little bit on that. Joanne is a mother of two bilingual children and an experienced nonprofit manager, educator, and social justice advocate. Before initiating One World Project, Joanne worked at the Alliance for a Greater New York and Urban Agenda, organizations aimed at building and thriving green and just New York. Previously, Joanne worked at the Ford Foundation and helped manage 3 grant-making initiatives with a combined annual budget of $12 million. Joanne has also done research for Partners of the Americas and the Center for Public and Nonprofit Leadership in Washington, D.C., and spent 2 years working as an English teacher in Alicante y Barcelona. Barcelona, did I say that right?
Exactly.
In España. The rest of it got cut off. No, she's an environmental study. She is a graduate in environmental studies from the University of Colorado in Boulder and holds a master's in public policy from Georgetown University. You've been around a little bit.
That's right.
You kind of bounced around. Where are you from originally?
So I'm from Millersville, Maryland, which is a
Maryland.
Small town sort of between Annapolis and Baltimore, sort of suburban, rural.
Yeah,
that's where I grew up.
Like greater DC area, and Baltimore area, but like a little drive.
Yeah, no, I mean, so more of a drive.
Yeah.
We actually never went to DC or Baltimore. We just stayed in Millersville generally. So it was long enough that you sort of had everything right there. But there was a farm down the street.
Yeah,
we, muck stalls, took care of horses. Spent a lot of time in the woods running around.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah, it was pretty.
And you in your bio
childhood.
talked about some green initiatives. So that's something, I know you talk a lot about the environment, and it's a big part of One World Project. Would you contribute your childhood memories to some of that?
I mean, some of it. I mean, certainly the connection to the farm was is really a big part of who I am. But both my mom and dad aren't very outdoorsy. Like every family vacation, we would come to Brooklyn. They're both from...
I was going to ask, what's the connection to New York City?
Yeah. So my mom, who passed away 5 years ago, almost today, was from Marine Park.
Oh, cool.
And my dad sort of grew up all through New York.
Nice.
And so they met on Atlantic Avenue many, many years ago. And I've sort of always been enamored by Brooklyn, and I had an opportunity to move to New York with the Ford Foundation after I went to graduate school. And so it felt like, in a way, coming home, right?
And you spent time here as a kid.
I did. Yeah. My mom's mom was here, so we spent a lot of time with my grandmother.
So were you hanging out in Marine Park?
Yeah.
Special.
Yeah. Marine Park.
You can't buy those experiences at Marine Park back in the day.
Yeah.
You ever hang out with Bobby Seeger back then?
Not Bobby Seeger, but Uncle Joe. You don't,
I don't know Uncle Joe. You know Bobby Seeger though, right?
Of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't? Do you know Madeline Gomez? She's watching. that somebody you know?
I don't know Madeline Gomez.
Hi, Madeline. How are you? Good to see you. Welcome. So did you stayed in Maryland through high school?
Yeah. I was born in Maryland, stayed in Maryland, and then in college.
What drove two New Yorkers to like somewhat rural Maryland to where you said they had no connection to nature really? What brought your parents there? Was it work or
work? Yeah. My dad worked for the National Security Agency.
Yeah, makes sense.
All growing up.
I was going to ask if it was a military connection.
Yeah. So Fort Meade, which is pretty close by, and Millersville.
The whole area is dotted. I lived in Norfolk, Virginia for a while, and I used to drive up this way all the time, and you're just driving through like military bases like the entire way. There's like that major. Was it there's an Air Force base in Delaware or something
tons.
It's just crazy. It's just like military everywhere. But like southeastern Virginia is like that's all it is like military with shopping centers.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So NSA.
Cool. So he did that, and I went to school my freshman year at the University of Delaware. And
okay. Is that in Wilmington?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, Newark.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Did you ever go to Wilmington? I've like driven through it, but it's like it always has interested me. I've just never actually like been inside. And like, do you know anything about it?
I know very little.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I just spent a year in
You
Delaware.
didn't go to D.C. You didn't go to Baltimore. You didn't go to Wilmington.
No, I mean,
I'm straight going to Brooklyn.
No, growing up, we never really spent any time in Baltimore or D.C. But my husband and I got married in Baltimore.
Okay.
Yeah. So do have a special connection with Baltimore as well.
Gotcha.
And then and then I went to school in D.C. and lived there. It was great. Yeah. It was. I learned a lot. Had my
international
ideology.
City too. It's like
challenged. Went to school with people I really respect.
And what was your degree in there?
Public policy.
And that was your master's degree.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So prior to that, you went to school. In Boulder, in Colorado.
Yeah. So University of Delaware, spent a year there, had a great experience, but never dreamed of going to school at University of Delaware. In fact, sent my parents a postcard, an aerial view of Newark, and with a little note that said, like, "This is where you've left me." So as soon as I got there, I sort of thought about like where I wanted to go and where I wanted to transfer to, and I had always dreamed of my senior year of high school. I did an Outward Bound experience and sort of that almost cliche of the transformative experience of Outward Bound. That was very much my experience.
That's great. I mean, that's why it's there, right?
I mean, it was
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. Dr. Whittick, I think that was our principal at Severna Park High School, somehow managed to get a grant to send a big herd of us, on student government, to go to
so
an
there's
Outward
a little
Bound.
Trail of crumbs left for
Yeah,
you. Nice.
Yeah. So anyway, that was extraordinary. University of Delaware, then figuring out how can I do more work with environment. University of Colorado made a lot of sense.
And what was your initial degree plan when you went to the University of Delaware?
Well, I had already done Outward Bound, and so I always say my experience at University of Delaware was very much like birds and trees, like very classic environment. Like I did biology, chemistry.
Yeah.
And then I went to the University of Colorado, and I took a really important class around environmental justice, and we started working on environmental justice organizing campaigns with primarily Mexican immigrants that were facing tremendous environmental inequities, and then juxtaposed against just tremendous wealth that in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
And I realized,
so it was a local issue.
A local issue. Yeah.
Mm.
And I desperately wanted to communicate with the folks I was working with, and I grew up taking French classes. That's what I opted into in elementary, middle, and high school. And because of that real desire to communicate and to try to be a force of change in environmental justice issues, I decided I wanted to learn Spanish. So I went to the University of Colorado, and I said, I have to graduate on time. This is a fortune to go to school.
Yeah.
And so the one place that I could go study and still graduate in time happened to be in Alicante, in Spain. So I didn't have tremendous choice.
Yeah.
But by sheer accident and incredible great fortune, I got to study in the south of Spain and have incredible professors.
There are worse places you could have landed.
Great food.
Right.
We took siestas on the Mediterranean.
Like sherry for lunch every day.
It's a pretty...
So did you set out with this intention of like the nonprofit and environmental justice degree program, or was that something that evolved? Did you just start school? You're like, I'm going to go to college and figure it out. Is that kind of how it started? And then you ended up being pulled in a certain direction?
Well, again, so I had this Outward Bound experience, and then it was birds and trees and environmental understanding. Then I had this broader perspective through coursework and experiences at the University of Colorado. But from the get-go, I knew I wanted to do something around environment.
Cool.
The shift really came in Colorado when I realized, wow, it's not only birds and trees.
Yeah.
It's people. And so that, like, how do we as a society manage the needs of, like, the world writ large, right? All the creatures on the world. So so that moved me more towards environmental justice, environmental studies experience. And then in Spain, I studied and thought a lot about more of sustainability, especially at a place like Alicante, which had tremendous natural assets, but were overrun at times with endless tourists. And so how could a city sustain itself and continue to grow economically, but in a way that preserves what in fact attracts people to the city in the first place?
And prior to landing in Spain, how much Spanish had you studied?
None. I still...
That's great.
Yeah, very much remember, like, on the bus. We took a plane to Madrid. We spent a week in there. We had a ton of fun. We also went to the Prado, but mostly had a lot of fun. Then we took a bus from Madrid to Alicante, and I remember awesome. Going over this hill thinking, like, give me the guidebook. I can't say, like, I don't know how to say anything. Yeah. Like, I need to be able to introduce myself. And so we crested the hill, and all of these families are waiting for us. And I learned how to say, like, my name is Joanne, and that was it. And then my host family are these remarkable, amazing, generous, loving people. And they taught me everything. I mean, I also took classes, but they were so patient. And I remember, like, they would pick up a fork and say, tenedor, and I'd repeat after them. Right. And one time they were like, zzz, mosquito. I'm like, oh, that one I get. Some of these I can...
You were like, oh, you borrowed that from English.
I understand. But, yeah, so I had this, they didn't speak any English. I didn't speak any Spanish. Nice. We did a lot of smiling initially.
Right. At least it was smiles.
Yeah. I learned words, the family, they were great cooks, and I learned to say, like, que rico, the food, and they were really happy with that. Yeah, right. So it was a remarkable and amazing experience. So
and just complete immersion.
So I really spoke nothing when I arrived. I also had really, really great teachers who would assign us, like, tonight your assignment is to go to the bar and to talk to people
and not get stabbed.
No, and
don't say the wrong thing.
No, and because the best way to learn a language is to talk to people. Yeah. So we had one of our classes called conversation, right? So, and we took an art history class. Anyway, Armando Migueles and his wife Cynthia are the folks that run the program in Alicante, and I learned a lot of Spanish, and I learned a lot of Spanish from them, from my teachers, and from my host family. Tatiana and Miguel Carlos are the mom and dad there, but I also learned a lot about welcoming people to a place, and about sort of the sharing pieces of your culture and making people feel very, very at home.
Yeah.
Right. And so I always admired that about Armando and Cynthia, and after that experience wanted to incorporate that into something I did professionally.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of always in the back of my head. I wasn't sure exactly how to do it.
Cool. Well, we're going to take a little break and get comfortable.
Okay, cool.
And we'll be back very soon. You're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. We'll check you in a few.
You're listening to the Talking Alternative Network.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Talking Alternative Radio, 24 hours a day.
Welcome back, everybody. Once again, you're listening to the Entrepreneurial. Sorry, it's my first one for the year, for the decade. We had a couple weeks off. I didn't have to say that. It's funny, like language is like, we were just talking about immersion, and like I find when I'm teaching a class, when I'm teaching martial arts, I teach martial arts often. When I take a little break, like there was no class for the kids for a couple weeks, and then I came back last week and started teaching, and I'm starting to say my stuff, and it's like I said this 1,000 times, and I was like, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what's the matter with my tongue? Like, what's going on? So it's like you really have to practice the language, which I've learned because I spoke decent Spanish for a while, but now I live in suburban Brooklyn and just don't have to anymore. But like when I was working in restaurants in the city, like that was it. You spoke Spanish or you got nothing, at a number of them. And like now I'm like, I don't ever have to, and so my tongue is like, it's like lazy. So sorry about that. Let's try that again. Rewind, wheel it up. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm your host, Jeremiah Fox, here with my guest, Joanne Derwin. What's up, Barbara? How are you? Good to see you. Hope you're having a good new year. If you're upstate, I hope you're enjoying it. Hopefully you have a little snow. It's been remarkable here, the weather right now. It's like really 50 degrees today. Warm. Love it. It's great. So yes, back to our conversation about immersion and how that can really it just arms you for, it's almost like your back is against the wall. Like that's where often the saying pressure makes diamonds, you're either going to crumble and just literally die or not survive, or you're going to rise to the situation. So for you, your situation being just dropped off, parachuted into Spain. Yeah. But what could you say? Manchego? Hola?
No, I could say
and you had to work it out. They didn't speak English, you didn't speak Spanish, and you had to, you just had to do it, and you had to rely. I love what you were saying about more than just learning Spanish, you learned how to be welcoming and open-armed about human communication, human interaction, which is gigantic. First of all, just for the human race, if we're going to survive, if we're going to pull this thing off, forget about being environmentally just. If we're just going to coexist, a good amount of that has to happen, and more of it.
Yeah,
than what's currently happening. And it's just like such a huge part of communication besides your words. It's like facial expressions, body gestures. And that's a big one, I think, just like being open armed and just welcoming just changes the dynamic of everything. So if you're listening and you're a business operator or you want to open your own business, like write that one down. You can't be like crossing your arms like I am right now and be like, no, I'm not going to do this. Most of the time you have to be very open and welcoming if you want to get things done.
Yeah. And authentic, right? And vulnerable. And
oh my God, vulnerable.
Put yourself out there.
And you were like so vulnerable, right? You were just like, I know nothing. I'm just like knocking you back in the woods. Like you're just like,
naively, right? I didn't even.
Well, sure. I mean, we can all trick ourselves and tell ourselves we know so much, but we're all like really naive most of the time and have no fucking clue what's going to happen. But I
was definitely very naive at like 20 when I went to contact the first
that's
time.
huge. That's I mean, now is not the time to do it, right? When you have like children and businesses to run and stuff. You still have to be a little naive. You have to be humble, but that was the time.
Yeah.
But I think that's amazing that you did that and just did it in the fashion that you did. Just like, I don't know, let's just go. Let's
figure it out.
Yeah. There's a certain story of resilience that people need in general, like just in general, like depression rates are high and all this stuff. Like resilience, I think, needs to be talked about a lot more. And how do you get that? Just by like immersing yourself in this environment that you know nothing about and being vulnerable and be willing to be taken care of a little bit and knowing like you're not going to pull this off alone. You're going to need help. Yeah. What does that require? It requires patience and it requires giving and all the things that you had to experience as a 20-year-old living in another country. But I'm sure you could say you've had to rekindle a lot of that starting, businesses and some of your accomplishments as of late, which we can get to a little more further on. I'd like for you to just like talk a little bit more about your experience in Spain and how that interaction with the people there really changed your thinking as a young person and somebody who was like, you had this desire to do something for people and to do something, you wanted to give in a way. You got this lesson. Can you talk more about that and how it affected you?
Sure. I mean, I didn't anticipate how important my experience in Spain would be for who I would become. Nor did I realize how powerful it is to go to another country and to learn another language in that immersion type of environment.
France wasn't available?
So that's the thing. I didn't want to learn French. I wanted to learn.
You already knew French, though.
Well, no, I didn't know French. That's the irony. It's like I grew up all taking weekly French classes,
right.
But in that pretty horrible language learning experience that
the mid-Atlantic 1980s and 90s.
No, it was like worksheets, verb conjugation. There was like a thing that the teacher would turn over when we could only speak French.
Right.
He was also like maybe the basketball coach. I mean, he was from somewhere in the United States. He didn't speak French very well.
Last name was Smith. Something like that.
Yeah. So I didn't know much French. I think I could read and write better than I could speak French.
Right.
And then I went to Spain, and after just 3 months, I was really felt comfortable and confident speaking in Spanish, and less so reading and writing because the experience I learned in Spanish was like the lived language.
Yeah.
And I learned. I mean, I didn't know much about Spanish history or Spanish art, and to learn that while living there. So I remember on one weekend trip, a friend and I decided to go find an El Greco painting that we had studied in art history class. So we took a bus. We went to this little town, hours and hours and hours away, found the church where it was.
And this was another American friend?
Another American friend, yeah.
So really setting out there.
And we found it. And it was one of those like magical experiences. Yeah. Like, there it is. There's this piece of art that we had studied. We learn the history, we know the background, and to see it in real life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then to make friendships with other Americans that have that shared experience. And that was my friend Lauren, who is still one of the people.
Right. Those bonds never break, right?
Most about. And
yeah,
exactly. Those bonds never break. And we set when my husband and I were married, put her on the table next to my friend from college in the hopes that they would get together. And now they're married and they have two kids. And
so
anyway, that's a lot of fun.
I'm assuming you met Jaime in Spain.
I did, yeah. So
wouldn't that be ironic?
Yeah. So I mean, I do say that like I fell in love with Spain first, and then and sort of I wanted to find someone who loved me as much as I loved Spain initially, and then when I went back to school, finished on time as I promised my parents, and graduating, I was like, what am I going to do with my life? It's that really scary moment of all that infrastructure that you have as a young person, you don't have any longer. And even if I was living in Boulder, my parents were in Maryland, but I still had a whole system of friends and
tons
support,
of support.
At the University of Colorado. So I thought about moving home, and then a friend from high school calls and she says, why don't we just move to Spain? I was like, well, that's a good idea. So we went back to Alicante, and we both lived with just people we met. There was at like the market had like, we're looking for someone to rent a room. So I rented a room with in one house, and she rented a room in another house, in the hope and expectation that we would continue to practice our Spanish and not only speak English to one another. And we started teaching English classes.
Nice.
And Armando and Cynthia were also incredibly helpful. And again, I grew up next to a horse farm, not far from a horse farm. And one time in Alicante, I saw a sign that said Pony Club, P-O-N-I. So I called, and I was like, I know about horses, but I don't know the vocabulary in Spanish about horses, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So they gave me a job at this pony club, and I taught little Spanish children about horseback riding. And then I would learn.
There's a lot of like, siéntate.
It was like, no, I would learn
That's
things
all you
like,
need to know.
dale fusta, which means like hit it with the whip.
Oh, yeah, I know that one.
So, yeah. So, and I learned things like how to say elbows, like bend your elbows before probably in normal conversation. I wouldn't have learned
Yeah,
that.
right, exactly.
So that was, a wonderful experience. And the other thing I did while I was back in Spain was I did the Camino de Santiago with Armando and his family and a group of about 15 or 16 Americans. We did 100 kilometers, so not the whole Camino, from León, which is where his family is from, to Santiago de Compostela. And we walked and walked and walked and had lots of blisters. And he would be like, no, have wine. You should have wine, and then your feet won't hurt. So we had wine, and we had clara, and we had delicious cheese.
Right, wine and cheese. That's it.
Yeah,
You're fine.
We were fine.
Keep walking.
Yeah. So on the Camino, I met 2 Americans, and afterwards we're like, let's go to Barcelona together. So we went to Barcelona. And I had been there one time before, and so I was sort of pretending, like a little bit, like new friends, showing off a little bit. I was like, don't worry, come with me to the taxi.
And you guys got robbed.
No, and we got into the taxi, and I was like, Al Puerto, like take us to. I thought they were taking us to the Olympic port, full of like all the discos, but instead he took us to El Puerto, where all the boats are parked.
Yeah.
So we got out, and I was sort of like humbled. I really know nothing about Barcelona. And we had a gigantic map out. And Jaime asked if we needed directions. So that's the story of how we met.
Fantastic.
And when he gets mad at me, he always says, I should have kept walking. So that's...
Oh, I have those stories too. Yeah.
So yeah, we met there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And your degree, from Boulder, what exactly was that in?
It's called environmental studies.
Okay. So
yeah.
So you continued along that trajectory.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then I came back. I really loved teaching when I was in Spain, and so went back to Boulder and sort of checked in with my professors and told them that I had this great experience in Spain. I taught English, and I loved teaching, and they were like, don't do it. Don't you don't understand. The people you were teaching in Spain wanted to learn.
Yeah.
That's not going to be your experience.
You're not going to get that here.
And
they were like, "Don't teach. You should open a school instead." That's probably
no,
not
but
what
I've
they
always been sort of. But really, I loved teaching. But I also really respected them, and I felt like they knew who I was.
And were they referring to
profoundly.
like taking a teaching gig in the States, like Department of Ed?
Yeah, I wanted to go back and get like a teaching degree,
yeah.
and then be an elementary school teacher or a high school teacher.
Right.
And
they were like, "You'll hate it."
No, don't do that. They were like very against.
Probably the best advice you got. Cool. We're going to take another break. We'll move on to the next hurdle, the next country and situation when we get back. You're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. We'll talk to you in a few.
You're listening to the Talking Alternative Network at www.talkingalternative.com. Now, broadcasting 24 hours a day. Talking Alternative.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
Do you love or are you intrigued about New York City and its neighborhoods? I'm Jeff Goodman, host of Rediscovering New York, a weekly show that showcases New York's history and its extraordinary neighborhoods. Every Tuesday live at 7 p.m., we focus on a particular neighborhood and explore its history, its vibe, its feel, and its energy. Tune in live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
I'm the aptly named host of Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio. Big nonprofit ideas for the other 95%. Fundraising, board relations, social media. My guests and I cover everything that small and mid-sized shops struggle with. If you have big dreams and a small budget, you have a home at Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio. Fridays 1 to 2 Eastern at talkingalternative.com.
Talking Alternative Radio, 24 hours a day.
Welcome back. Listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm going to take my time and say it properly. It's what happened is the Spanish is just coming out to me, so I want to say Bienvenidos! No, I'm kidding. You're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm your host, Jeremiah Fox, here with my guest, Joanne Derwin, who started a Spanish immersion preschool in the neighborhood we live in, Windsor Terrace in Brooklyn, called One World Project. Really wonderful school. My second daughter went there for preschool for 2 years. My oldest did after school. Mm-hmm. My third is registered for the upcoming school year. But let's talk briefly about the beginnings and how Joanne and I got to know each other. Again, we live and have for a long time. You've been in the neighborhood for a solid 15 plus years, right?
No, I mean, probably more, 10 years, maybe 11 years.
At least, because
Yeah.
it was 10 years ago when we
You're right.
when we started everything.
Yep.
We've been there closer to almost 15 at this point. But our oldest children, Nico and JC, are the same age. They're both. Is Nico 13 yet?
Yeah, he just turned 13.
So JC's not quite. So this was going back almost 10 years ago, and our kids were 3, roughly. And for those of you that don't live in New York or don't have children or just don't know, preschool is fucking expensive around. Just daycare is expensive. It's like what I paid for a semester of school in my master's. That's how much it costs these days, just for a kid to go somewhere during the day and maybe not even get educated, just play groups. So us being, I think the entrepreneurial spirit was already there. Hustlers, watching our bank accounts and just having dreams and goals, but also we had no money at the time, so I couldn't afford it. And a lot of parents, I think, and I knew about this because of parents who had kids just a little older than ours had done the same thing. This idea of a preschool co-op where a number of families, in our case, it was like 8 families.
Yeah, something like
that. Get together, pool the money, hire a teacher, and hire assistant if possible, or become the assistants yourselves and alternate. Some of them they rent a space. Some of them it just goes like house to house, week by week or bi-weekly, whatever the case may be. But it's just like this, spearheaded by the families. You pick, what you want to emphasize. And in this case, we got together. We met. I guess Michelle Greenberg kind of connected us. And we ended up hiring a French teacher, right?
A teacher. Well, she was going to speak to the kids in English, but she was French.
She was French, and there was going to be that French, like that bilingual component. So they actually got some education and socialization, and there were 8 kids, and the parents we wanted to hire an assistant, and I think we even had one, but they never showed up or something like that. The whole thing was a train.
It was pretty much a disaster.
We had found a local church that was going to let us rent their basement for 3 days a week to host the school out of. And right before the session was supposed to start, they wanted to double the rent or something ridiculous. They were just like, "Oh yeah, we need a lot more money." And we're like, "No, that's not going to work." So in a scramble, we're like, "What are we going to do?" And I had an infant at the time. Ada was a few months old. And we had a yard and a decent sized space. And I was like, well, you can use my place. I'll be in the other side with my baby. I can't help. So you can use the space. And the parents ended up alternating as assistants.
Right.
If memory serves.
Exactly.
And
we did that, but we only did that for maybe...
By Thanksgiving, the whole thing was dissolved.
For a month.
It was ridiculous. It went south so fast. And I think Michelle regrouped by January and was doing something somewhere else in the neighborhood that was too far for me to go. And then it wasn't long after that you started out of your place doing Spanish, correct? Do you want to talk about the humble beginnings?
Yeah.
And after such disaster and just failure, essentially, it was just the whole thing, the ship sank quickly. Yeah. We all just jumped off.
Right. I mean, I think to me it was an important learning experience in that,
absolutely.
How hard it is to organize people and find really competent teachers, make a budget work in an educational setting. Yeah. Right. So after that all imploded, we were trying to figure out what to do. Nico in the end went to a public preschool.
At 3?
At 4.
Oh, okay.
So I don't.
So later that year, you didn't. I mean, we didn't do anything. I was just like,
so
sorry, JC,
you're
gonna. I was like, JC, you're gonna learn how to run a business, and she just went to work with me all the time.
I mean, so I was working full time. We had a babysitter who we were working with.
So what were you doing at the time?
So
I never asked that.
Yeah. So I was working.
Your bio, I guess.
Coalition building in New York, connecting progressive business with the labor movement and community organizations. So I felt like I knew what I was doing. Like I was really good at coalition building and thought so I thought, and then I couldn't figure out how to get.
Are you implying
our
later experiences?
No, our little baby co-op. We couldn't get it off the ground.
Ridiculous.
So Nico hung out there, and then we ended up enrolling him in a public school while I still had that back of my mind, like, wait a second, couldn't we do something in Spanish? That's initially what I really wanted to ensure and to shore up with our kids. So Nico's out of public school and had because he didn't have any school experience, the first foray in terms of drop off was out of public school with one teacher and 28 kids. And he was like, Mama, where are you going? So he cried and cried and cried. And so I just hung out in the classroom for a long.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And where was this at? Because 154 wasn't.
No,
taking
so
people,
I mean, when our kids were in preschool, you had we tried to get into a place called Bean Sprouts.
Yeah, I know Bean Sprouts.
And we did like a play date, and Nico failed it and didn't get in. And
how did you fail a play date?
I don't know, but we didn't get offered a spot. Then we tried to go to a place called Chickpeas, and they didn't have any spots.
Chickpeas too, right?
And so,
right. Well, there was also an issue with saturation at the time, right? It was just it was so competitive. We're talking about like nearly Park Slope, and just babies popping out. I think the year Nico and JC started 154, they said that was the biggest incoming class of kindergartners they'd ever had. I mean, it was just like
huge.
2009 was a hot year.
Yeah.
Or not 9. Sorry, 2006.
6.
Yeah. It's a good year.
Yeah.
Good year for kids.
So we just, so he had this public preschool experience at a school in Marine Park, actually, because
taking it back.
Marine Park had tons and tons
Jesus, you had to commute to Marine.
Open
no wonder you
spots.
stay there. You were just like, well, I got to be back in a few hours.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So, and it was a half-day preschool program.
Right.
So you went, you dropped him off, and then you had to pick him up at 10:30.
Was it DOE or was it?
Yeah, in a public school.
Yeah.
So that was good.
And
it didn't cost
the
us a
UPK
fortune.
thing hadn't happened yet.
No, it was just like But so he had this experience. So in part, I was incredibly grateful that we were able to find him a place that in a public program. But then when I was hanging out in the classroom, because we hadn't done any pre-school experience with him, what I actually saw in the classroom, I had some concerns about. So
you were in Marine Park.
I wasn't enamored by the. So the teacher was very effective in classroom management, but
I bet.
But also, shaming children into doing things and not doing things. And then one experience I remember in particular is the kids were asked to make snowmen. And she had the teacher example of what the snowman was supposed to look like. And Nico was incredibly creative and wanted to use all sorts of colors. And she sort of wagged her finger at him and said, like, Nico, a snowman
don't look like that.
It's all white, and the big snowball has to go on the bottom. And I just thought, oh, gosh, that visceral, it shouldn't be like that. And then on Saturdays, he was taking Spanish classes. And I was also hanging out in the Spanish classroom because he was also like, Mama. So I got to see what was happening in the Spanish classroom, and that, the teacher in the Spanish classroom had made this massive sun with the kids. They were gotten all dirty. There was orange and yellow and pieces of paper. And after she let the sun dry for 4 hours. And at the end of the class, she cut up the sun and gave everyone a ray of sun to take home. Aww. And it was like, yes, that's it. That's how it should be. And so Nico's Spanish teacher was Monica.
Oh, well, of course. This totally makes sense.
Yeah. So after
amazing.
So after class, I was
person.
like, Monica,
what are you doing?
Let's start a school together. And she's like, whose mom are you? But
I'm sorry. I could just see this interaction going down, knowing her. It's so funny.
Yeah.
And so that was what? That was 2011.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. 2011. So Monica and I met, we read, we reflected, we were really inspired and realized this isn't a totally crazy idea. Let's start a school together. And we couldn't find a place that would rent to us.
Right.
So we started in our living room. I tell the story that we had a house that had a living room, and then Monica came, and then it was sort of like...
We had a school with bedrooms.
Yeah, a transformation. All of a sudden, it's a classroom. And we started there, and it was just with Elena, because Nico was already in kindergarten at the time, with my younger daughter.
Oh, right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
she was what, 2 at the time?
She was 2, yeah. Mm-hmm. So with her, and there's a listserv called Brooklynitos for Spanish-speaking families in Brooklyn, and I posted does anyone want to learn Spanish with my daughter? And we had maybe 4 kids that started with us, and it grew over the course of the year to about 12, and then we were at about 16,
In the same fashion as we had tried before, just kind of co-opt. You guys were just running it. It was like cash only operation.
No, I mean, much more formal.
Oh, okay. You went legit.
Yeah.
Maybe that was our problem.
Yeah.
Jack Wilson's listening. This guy's a teacher too. So he did the fellowship with Patty.
Oh, cool.
So my wife's a high school math teacher, for those of you that don't know. She was a New York teaching fellow 15 years ago. And one of the things that we've always admired about you is she's always talked about starting a school. Like our pillow talk has been about like starting our own school many times. And like, you did it. We're like, holy shit. Like, this lady's badass. So,
yeah.
All right. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a few. We're going to relax and we'll talk more about One World Project and what it really has become and what it stands for and all the amazing things that it's done. We'll be back in a few, listening to the Entrepreneurial Web.
Talking Alternative Radio, 24 hours a day.
I'm the aptly named host of Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio. Big nonprofit ideas for the other 95%. Fundraising, board relations, social media. My guests and I cover everything that small and mid-sized shops struggle with. If you have big dreams and a small budget, you have a home at Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio. Fridays 1 to 2 Eastern at talkingalternative.com.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
TalkingAlternative.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back. You're listening to Entrepreneurial Web. Your host, Jeremiah Fox, here with my guest, Joanne Derwin, who started One World Project, a Spanish-immersion preschool located in Windsor Terrace in Brooklyn that went from her living room. She was literally doing it out of her house, but legitimately so.
Yes.
Got an EIN, act like a big girl.
Yep.
Got that tax ID number.
Yep.
And
we needed liability insurance.
yeah, well, I remember when we were, our first discussions when we were doing it with, with Michelle and all those people, like that came up, and I remember personally being like, "Nah, man, just keep it cash. We ain't got to worry about it," because I had done a couple underground operations myself at that point. It was just like cash only, no insurance. They're gonna get us, but yeah, it's a good move, especially with kids. And
yeah, of course.
And then and you guys even looked at the space that Della ended up taking, and it was just like, nope, this whole place is a liability.
There's no HVAC system. It's been pulled out by a very angry departing tenant.
Yeah.
Go for it, crazy. Jeremiah.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I was like, hold my beer. I got this. What a nightmare it's been. No, I'm kidding. It's been great. And you eventually, was the next move subletting the Kings Bay Y?
Yeah. So we set up.
Well, you got popular. I remember that. I remember people saying, because Ada was still only like 1, and when she was 2, we did another pop up thing that had already been in establishment for a while. You might have known Maria. I can't remember her last name, but she just like roamed the neighborhood doing it for like 10 years.
Wow.
She was actually a public school teacher. And she was teaching somewhere around on the west side, around Houston or Canal, on September 11th, and quit that day. She was just like, what happened to her in the classroom with the kids. She was like, and I think she felt that the DOE didn't really address things in a way that like she could psychologically handle and be around kids. And she was just like, nope, I'm done. And so she just did pop-ups specifically in Windsor Terrace. for the better part of 10 years. When she finally moved away, she like moved to some farm. She was a New Yorker. Finally moved to some farm. There was like a going away party for her, and they did it at Greenwood Playground. I knew a lot of the kids, but never knew that they had, taken her classes. And some of them, Ada was probably like 7 at the time, but there were kids that were like 16 that I knew when they were younger, but never knew. It was just like really great. But just like dozens of kids that came out. But Ada had done that, and that was the same thing where it actually went house to house on a biweekly basis. And if it was at your house, you were the assistant.
Yeah.
And provided the food, and it was super cheap, but no cash only, no insurance, all that stuff. But I remember hearing people talk about One World and like, this place is amazing. And I remembered our experiences, but it got popular really fast.
Yeah. I mean, we worked really hard to make sure that the curriculum met kids' interests. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I frankly feel like we put so much love into what we were building, and Monica and I worked really, really, really hard, and quickly brought on Sylvia to help with the finances, mm-hmm. and to really lead up the administrative team, and it felt really, really good. Yeah. And so we outgrew our house. Plus, especially for our kids, there came a point where it was like, I just want to veg, and it's hard when there's like 12 kids here in my living room. Yep. So we subletted space from the Kings Bay Y, and we were there for 2 years.
And that's kind of nice because you didn't get yourself, it's good and bad, right? Because you pay higher rates than you probably normally would.
Right.
But you're not bound to a long-term lease. You're not responsible for so many of the things that go into that, like actually having a lease in the building. Like any issues, you kind of just like passed on to them. And they had a lot of, because children were going there, they had a lot of the insurances and things like that in place already, correct, for you to operate. We did the same thing with Nanny Goat Hill when we were doing the wine bar at Crossroads. Like they had the liquor license, we just came in and did our thing and like got out. And when they were like, we're leaving, we were like, so are we bye, and got the hell out. But so in a way you had like a little incubator, right, to practice, and you ended up taking both of the spaces. Were you just in the one side the first year?
No,
you were using both.
Yeah. So we used both spaces from the beginning, and you're right. It was less scary in a way because we didn't have to sign a long-term lease. There was already a fire alarm system in place.
Infrastructure built out, all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
It was and we were able to get permitted by the Department of Health pretty easily. Mm-hmm. So we did all of that, and we were there for 2 years. In the end, because it wasn't our lease, we would have liked to possibly extend, but after 2 years, they were ready to grow into the space that they had leased to us.
Because they weren't really using it during the day.
They weren't. No, not at the time.
But now they
do
full functional.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I came a point where we had to find a space to move into, and so we looked at a lot of different places.
I remember going to we saw there was talk of building a space. There was like all kinds of craziness and looking at some old buildings. I remember going with, it was Marzuki, right?
Yeah,
he and I were like in that old building at Holy Name, like, will this stand up? That was a crazy experience. That building was nuts.
Yeah. I still would love to find a way to make that building happen.
It's amazing, but like
still empty.
Yeah.
But it's full of asbestos.
So how did you end up in? So you ended up in a church ultimately, anyways.
Well, so in those 2 years of subleasing from the Kings Bay Y, I learned a lot about the Department of Health and Department of Buildings and the fire department, and understood that it was really challenging to change the certificate of occupancy. Mm-hmm. And so if we were to operate in a religious organization, then we could get a letter of no objection. We just did I just looked at Google Maps and overlaid religious institutions and started calling people.
That's so street. That's awesome. I love that.
So call people.
And that church was pretty much not being used because when we first moved to Windsor Terrace, we lived right across from that church. And even back then, like 15 years ago, nobody was doing anything. Like there was a summer camp in there, but like they never There was no services. There was nothing ever happening, really.
Right. And so they called us back at the International Baptist Church, and they were using the space for Sunday services at the time, but it was empty at all other times.
Right.
And so initially we shared the space with the church, but then that was subleasing from the International Baptist Church. But then they were able to find space in the larger church on Coney Island Avenue in the Circle.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And so we had the space to ourselves.
Amazing.
We started doing improvements. We thought initially it was going to be it was going to be like maybe $50,000, and it ended up costing us $200,000.
I know that story.
To get the space up.
Della was the same way. It was like, this should be like $150,000, and it was like tick 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 tick.
Yeah. But now we're there. We love it.
And you were able to expand your offerings in a big way, and you got UPK right around the same time, right? UPK status, and
right,
and really like. There's a big waiting list. Your school is very sought after at this point.
Yeah.
Correct?
I mean, we have a preschool, we have an after school, we have camp programs, but most importantly, we really want to be a community center.
Right.
And to be a place.
You offer classes for adults in Spanish. You guys do like get-togethers and a bunch of different things.
Lots of different things.
So before we wrap up, I've wanted to bring this up because when Ada was leaving to go to public school, she was going into kindergarten. There was a little questionnaire, and it was like, if there was one thing about One World you would change, what would it be? And my answer was offer kindergarten through 5th grade, so I don't have to send my kids to public school, and they get to stay in this really awesome space. So you got 60 seconds. What is the future of One World? Is that going to happen? Will Naya go to One World through 5th grade? Quick, you got 45 seconds now.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we do really, really effectively is early childhood.
Yeah.
And we also do after school really effectively. So that's what we're going to continue to do. I do dream of opening a second location, maybe in Sunset Park.
Nice.
And there are a group of parents who have been inspired by One World Project that are trying to start an elementary school. And
ultimately, I think you want to share like your experiences, right? So that would be good. Like sharing the framework of like, this is how you do this, and be
spreading
like you said
seeds.
early, like be welcoming, be open armed. You guys do a lot of. There's a big environmental component to One World Project. There's a lot of birds and trees and just like really great things. And I think you probably want to share the framework of that to see like, doesn't have to be One World Project. It can be other things, but mirrored after that and share that with the world.
Yeah. We'd
Correct?
love for more programs like ours to get up and running and want to be
great.
Part of that.
That's awesome.
Help them.
So hopefully this is a really great way for you to start your year. Just awesome messages, start your decade, start your week, the month, whatever it is. There's a lot of really valuable lessons you shared with us today. So thank you. It was really awesome having you on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremiah.
Oh, my pleasure. All right, everybody. We'll check in with you next week. You're listening to the Entrepreneurial Web. Have an awesome weekend. Peace out.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Talking Alternative Radio, 24 hours a day.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
I'm the aptly named host of Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio. Big nonprofit ideas for the other 95%. Fundraising, board relations, social media. My guests and I cover everything that small and mid-sized shops struggle with. If you have big dreams and a small budget, you have a home at Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio. Fridays 1 to 2 Eastern at talkingalternative.com.
Hey, all you crazy listeners. Looking to boost your business? Why not advertise on Talking Alternative with very reasonable rates? Interested? Simply email at info@talkingalternative.com.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to the Talking Alternative Network at www.talkingalternative.com. Now, broadcasting 24 hours a day. Talking Alternative.
Do you love or are you intrigued about New York City and its neighborhoods? I'm Jeff Goodman, host of Rediscovering New York, a weekly show that showcases New York's history and its extraordinary neighborhoods. Every Tuesday live at 7 p.m., we focus on a particular neighborhood and explore its history, its vibe, its feel, and its energy. Tune in live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to the Talking Alternative Network.